Mr. Brown? Is that true? You had intended to swap your wife for a younger woman? The voice of the judge tore through the courtroom as suddenly as thunder. Cameras popped, gasps burst forth, and in one instant, the man who once referred to himself as the proud patriarch of sister wives was reduced to his essence, revealed as a betrayer. Robyn, his wife, who stood by him when all others turned their backs, now sat opposite him calling for justice. What ensued wasn't merely a divorce, it was an execution of his deceptions, his pride and his empire in public. And believe me, when the verdict was handed down, Kody Brown's life would never be the same again. The words burst through the quiet courtroom like a clap of thunder, leaving a silence so dense that it sucked the oxygen from the room. All the camera shutters halted. All the whispered exchanges died on lips. Even the scratch of a pen in the court clerk's hand hung suspended. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the man who stood before the bench. Kody Brown, his once confident stance, now betraying the gravity of the charges against him. He wasn't the charming patriarch of TV anymore. He wasn't the man who proudly referred to himself as the leader of a plural family, a husband of 4, a father of many. He appeared small, trapped, and desperate. A man whose tightly controlled image was shattering in front of us. Robyn Brown had sat only a few feet away, but the gap between them now seemed like a canyon of betrayal. Her eyes, red-rimmed and puffy from lack of sleep and tears, blazed with anger and sorrow as they fastened on him. This was not another fight or dispute. This was the point everything went wrong. The point when decades of sacrifice, promises, and vows crumbled under the load of one selfish decision. The courtroom itself was alive, buzzing with a mix of curiosity and judgment. Banked rows of reporters packed the benches, pens poised to capture each word of this family's collapse. Viewers of the once iconic reality show occupied the back rows, phones clutched tightly, streaming live reports to millions globally. Even the judge, an old hand who had heard it all, appeared a little discomfited by what lay before him. This was no ordinary divorce hearing. This was a public accounting, a cultural moment, and standing at its center was the man who once lectured on loyalty and cohesion, now accused of betrayal. So profound it teetered perilously close to the unforgivable. Kody strained his throat, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Your Honor, But before he could go on, Robyn's lawyer stood up from her chair, clutching a thick pile of papers. "Let me remind you, Mr. Brown," she snapped. "Exhibit A, text message, screenshots you sent to a woman who is half as old as your wife. Exhibit B, an email exchange about a possible marriage contract. Exhibit C, financial records detailing money transferred in secret to a different account, most likely to begin a new family." The gallery breathed a collective gasp as the evidence was displayed on a huge screen. Line by line, Kody's words were laid out. Words that provided a picture of a man scheming a future without the woman sitting opposite him. "She's too emotional. I need someone who understands where I am in life. This could be a fresh start." Each sentence dropped like a hammer blow, and Robyn's knuckles went white as she gripped a tissue in her lap. The judge leaned in, his voice now icy, sharper. "Mr. Brown, this evidence does not only imply intent, but premeditation. Were you not looking to bring in a new wife to this marriage without your present wife's consent or knowledge?" Kody's mouth opened, but the words got stuck somewhere between his throat and his pride. He gazed at the floor, then at the judge, then at last at Robyn, and the look on her face almost crushed him. She was the one who had stood up for him when the rest of the others had rejected him. The one who had remained with him when Christine, Janelle and Mary had all turned their backs on him. Robyn had been the sole steadfast soldier in a decaying empire, bearing public shame and private suffering simply because she believed in him. And now she sat there regarding him like a stranger. "Yes," he finally mumbled, the sound barely audible. The courtroom exploded. Gasps and whispers, the mad scribble of reporters' pens. Robyn did not stir. She did not blink. But one tear escaped down her cheek, and that small silent detail spoke louder than any eruption ever could. The prosecutor moved forward once more, walking slowly. "Brown, you've constructed a public image on faith, loyalty and family values. You've talked about commitment, about the sacredness of marriage, about the sacrifices of plural living. Were those words all falsehoods? They weren't falsehoods. Kody snapped back, a touch of his former arrogance seeping into his voice. But people grow, life evolves. I have the right to seek happiness too. And your wife? The prosecutor shot back. Doesn't she have a right to honesty, to respect, to dignity? Kody did not respond. His silence was cripplingly loud. Robyn's lawyer addressed the judge. Your Honor, my client has suffered humiliation, emotional abuse and betrayal in front of the entire nation. She gave up everything for this marriage. Her career, her privacy, her relationships, all because she was promised by Mr. Brown. And now those promises are utterly destroyed in the most public and humiliating manner possible. The judge nodded solemnly. The proof is plain. This is not a miscommunication. This is not a misunderstanding. This is an act of deliberate deception that took place over months, perhaps even years. It is, essentially, an act of deep betrayal. For the first time ever, Kody's poise cracked. He leaned forward, the weight of the judge's words bearing down on him. The man who once paraded across TV screens with confidence and authority now resembled a shadow of his former self. The walls were closing in, and for the first time in his life, there was no one to blame but himself. Robyn finally stood up to speak, her voice shaking but firm. I gave you everything, she declared. Every word a knife. I stood up for you when no one else would. I trusted you when everyone warned me not to. I saw our family disintegrate, and I remained because I thought you still trusted us. And all this time you were going to replace me, not because I let you down, but because I got old. Kody's eyes brimmed with something between defiance and regret, but the harm was done. Robyn went on, her voice now tinged with fire. I might not be 25 anymore. I might not conform to your new fantasy. But I will no longer be a woman you cast aside when you're finished with me. This isn't merely about a marriage, it's about accountability. The gavel of the judge came down once, and the day's session was at an end, but the reverberations of the moment would last much, much longer. As Kody was led out of the courtroom, his shoulders slumped and his jaw set, Robyn sat on, facing straight ahead. The cameras focused in on her face, not the tear-stained, shattered woman the tabloids had predicted, but a woman of still, angry power. This was not the end of their history. It was the start of a reckoning. And for the first time in decades, Kody Brown was no longer the man in charge. The courtroom wasn't just a chamber of judgment today. It was a mirror, reflecting back on every selfish choice, every hollow promise, every damage he had avoided for years. And in that mirror, he at last saw himself not as the hero of the sister wives story, but as the villain of his own creation. And as Robyn exited into the sea of reporters, she didn't shield her face or ignore their questioning. She stood tall in front of the cameras and said words that would resonate through headlines and hashtags for weeks to come. This isn't about me. It's about every woman who's ever been told she's not enough. And today I proved that we are. The audience applauded. The tale was only just unfolding. The question burst through the air like a clap of thunder, stilling the agitated buzz of the crowded courtroom. Cameras halted mid-click. A silence fell across the gallery as everyone's eyes focused on the figure at the eye of the hurricane. Kody Brown. Where once the self-assured, charismatic head of a vast plural family, he now stood revealed, his well-constructed image crumbling under the crash of betrayal. His fingers drummed at his side, his jaw clenched, his eyes nervously flashing toward the woman he had betrayed. Only a few feet away sat Robyn Brown, the wife who had been his most stalwart supporter. Her eyes, which had been lined with sleepless nights and sorrow, blazed with an icy fury capable of cutting through steel. She had been the last to leave his bedside. The woman who stood up for him, when Christine, Janelle and Mary had abandoned him. She had weathered judgment, criticism and exclusion because she believed in him. And yet, there she stood, humiliated and betrayed, confronted with the most ugly truth of all. The man for whom she had given up everything was willing to cast her aside for someone younger, someone whom he could shape into a fresh fantasy. The courtroom itself was alive with tension. The judge hunched forward over the bench, his face chiseled out of stone. The reporters crouched over their notepads, fingers shaking in excitement. In the rear seats, Erstwhile supporters of the erstwhile popular reality series Sister Wives traded stunned whispers. This was not merely a case of divorce. This was the public destruction of an empire founded on loyalty, religion, and family, an empire Kody himself had incinerated with his own pride. Kody cleared his throat, his strained and shaky voice. I mean it wasn't like that. But before he could fumble for excuses, Robyn's attorney stood, a towering presence radiating righteous anger. Your Honor, she began. Your Honor, she began. Allow me to present Exhibit A. Screens behind her flickered to life, revealing screenshots of Kody's private messages. Each word stung like a slap to the face. She's too emotional now. I need someone who understands my vision. This next chapter needs to look different, younger. Gasps resonated throughout the courtroom. Robyn's hands shook a little, but she didn't flinch. She needed Kody to realize the hurt he'd inflicted, needed him to realize that the man who'd once said family was everything had brought her to the point where she was a temporary chapter in his book. The lawyer went on mercilessly. Exhibit B, she said. A string of emails followed, which depicted Kody negotiating the provisions of a possible prenuptial contract with a woman who was almost 2 decades his junior. Next was Exhibit C, an accounting report which disclosed money covertly drained from shared accounts to make arrangements for a new home. The judge's face blackened. Mr. Brown, he said sharply, are you saying that none of this amounts to an intent to replace your wife? Kody shifted restlessly. The lights in the courtroom seemed hotter now, the pressure of 1,000 eyes searing into him. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. Finally he let out a small defeated breath. I made mistakes, he whispered. Mistakes. Robyn's lawyer retorted, her tone slicing through the quiet. You didn't forget an anniversary. You didn't skip a date night. You coordinated a whole new marriage. Secretly, you constructed a future with someone else while she waited on you hand and foot through each scandal, each public humiliation. Is that your version of a mistake? Kody's head lowered. He had no response. Robyn slowly got up from her chair, all eyes on her as she walked to the witness stand. Her voice shook initially, but with each sentence it grew stronger. I stood with this man when everyone else deserted him. I stood up to him against the world. I believed in him when no one else believed in him. And at the same time that I was doing that, he was scheming to replace me, like I was expendable, like I was a drag rather than a partner. Her voice cut through the silence. There was no screaming, no drama, only raw, unflinching heartbreak. Do you know what it feels like, she went on, to give yourself to someone, to make plans with them, only to discover you never belonged in their plans? He didn't want a partner. He wanted a trophy. And when I wasn't shiny anymore, he sought one out. The courtroom was silent as a tomb. Even the judge looked shaken by the seriousness of what she was saying. Kody's shoulders sagged as though each sentence was a bodily punch. The man who had once spoken of forever commitment, of unity and sacrifice, now resembled a stranger, frail, embarrassed, and horribly alone. Mr. Brown, the judge declared at last, his voice severe and unrelenting. This court does not see a misunderstanding, but a calculated betrayal. You are not here only as a husband who has violated his vows, but also as a man who used loyalty and trust for selfish purposes. Kody swallowed hard, his lips quivering, but the damage was done. The evidence was conclusive. The public's verdict was harsh. The man who had once kept his family intact was exposed as the one who dismantled it. And when the gavel came down, calling for a recess, Robyn sat, her gaze never leaving the man she no longer knew. She wasn't the same woman who had entered that courtroom. Something had changed. Something irrevocable. The betrayal had burned away whatever love or allegiance was left. Now there was only the determination to make him pay. And as Kody was escorted out by his lawyers, rumors preceded him out of the courtroom. The great patriarch, the hub of a reality TV kingdom, was now just one more guy trapped in his own lie. And everyone who was watching, the judge, the courtroom, millions on the internet, knew this was only the start of his destruction. Because this wasn't merely a case of cheating. It was about power, respect, and justice. And Robyn Brown was no longer a supporting actor in Kody's tale. She was on the verge of becoming the one who revised the ending. The courtroom remained thick with tension. When Robyn slowly stood up from her chair, her hand shaking around a tissue, cameras zoomed in, pens poised over notepads, and the judge leaned forward slightly, feeling like what was to be revealed would define the whole case. Robyn swallowed hard, the type of swallow that precedes a truth that is too much to keep bottled up any longer. Whoever met Kody for the first time, she started, her voice shaking, will say that he was a perfect guy. I thought I had found my forever. I trusted the vows he gave. Of loyalty, of faith, of a love that would last forever. I gave up everything to be a part of his universe. I left my old life behind. Family, stability, all for a man who swore he would always put me first. The gallery was still attentive. Robyn's eyes shone with tears as memories flashed before them. Experiences once filled with laughter and love now tainted with betrayal. We were to grow old together, she went on. We were to brave every storm together. But what I discovered instead, not from him, but from whispers, rumors and messages he never intended me to see, was that he was forging a future without me. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Robyn gripped the witness stand as if it alone were propping her up. I discovered texts he'd sent a different woman, she said, her voice cracking. Wedding plans, talk of how she'd adapt to being part of the family. Texts calling me too emotional. As though my love, my dedication had been an annoyance. The judge's brow creased. Some jurors looked at each other, their faces stiffening with compassion. Robyn went on, the gravity of each sentence rattling the walls about her. Do you know what it's like to read your husband's dream life and discover you're not a part of it? Do you know what it's like to discover that every I love you was a stand-in for someone else? Tears flowed down her face now, but she refused to wipe them away. She wanted the court and Kody to notice them. I stuck with him when the other wives left. I stood up for him when the world ridiculed us. I thought that love was about loyalty, even when life got difficult. But he interpreted my loyalty as weakness. He used it as license to map out a life without me. Kody shifted uncomfortably at the defense table, his eyes staring at the floor. The man who once held a household in command now appeared helpless in the face of reality. Robyn's lawyer stepped forward softly. Mrs. Brown, she asked, softly, what did this betrayal do to you? Robyn's lips quivered as she replied. It shattered me, she breathed. It shattered every fragment of who I believed I was. I began to question everything. My value, my decisions, my sanity. I asked myself, what did I do wrong? Was I not enough? And then I understood. It wasn't about me at all. It was about him, his greed, his pride, his love of being worshipped. The courtroom was completely still now, as if the whole room was holding its breath. Robyn's tears, her shaking voice, her naked truth, it was more than mere testimony. It was a confession of wounds so deep, they could never really heal. And the worst of it, she said, her voice filling with a rising anger, is that I had believed him when he told me I was special. I had believed him when he told me I was different, and while I was believing, he had been plotting my replacement. That isn't betrayal, that's cruelty. Her words struck Kody like punches. He glanced up for a moment, his eyes red and tearful, but he could not manage to utter a word. All his justifications, all his excuses he had practiced faltered under the tragic pain of Robyn. Mrs. Brown, the judge broke in softly. Do you think your husband ever meant to keep his promise to you? Robyn breathed in deeply, shuddering. I don't know, she said. Perhaps he did, once. Perhaps he did in the start. But somewhere along the line, I was no longer a partner, but a stepping stone. And when he thought he could do better, he chose to climb on top of me and continue. The words hung in the air like a judgment of their own. Robyn wasn't simply sharing her story. She was revealing the heart of a marriage founded on deception. Her lawyer walked up to the bench with one last question. Mrs. Brown, why did you decide to bring this to court? Robyn stiffened, her tears evaporating as steel crept back into her voice. Because I won't let him get away without a price. Because this isn't about a marriage, it's about a pattern of betrayal. About a man who thinks he's above the law. I want the world to know that there are repercussions for treating people like they're disposable. The courtroom broke out in whispers, reporters typing furiously as Robyn left the stand. Even the judge's gaze stayed on her for a moment longer. Not as a victim, but as a woman taking back control. Kody adjusted his seat, his face ashen. This wasn't the Robyn he knew. The meek, forgiving wife who always stood up for him. This was a different person. A tougher person. And in the back of his mind, he knew the tide had shifted. For so long Kody Brown had held the reins. But now, under oath, before the world, Robyn held the truth. And it was that truth, raw, painful, and inescapable, that would be the tool that would finally bring him down. And as the gavel came down to close the session, it was obvious the battle lines had been drawn. Robyn was no longer battling for a marriage. She was battling for justice. And Kody was finally coming to comprehend that this time he may lose. By the time the court resumed the following morning, the news had already blown out to every major media outlet. Headlines blared of humiliation and betrayal. Commentators analyzed each tear, each statement, each incriminating piece of testimony from Robyn's statement. The public had already delivered its verdict in the opinion court. Kody Brown, the former self-styled king of his polygamous kingdom, was a traitor. And yet, in the hushed reverence of the courtroom, the legal battle was far from won. Kody's attorney, a tall, silver-haired man with a reputation for courtroom theatrics, rose from his seat with the confidence of someone who believed he could still rewrite the narrative. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. "This case is not about betrayal or broken hearts. It is about religious freedom, about cultural context, and about a man who has lived his life guided by principles that are deeply misunderstood by the outside world." The gallery shifted restlessly. Robyn's lawyer crossed her arms, skeptical. But the defense attorney continued. "My client Mr. Brown has lived out his faith. A faith that practices plural marriage as a spiritual tenet. Conversation about enlarging one's household is not betrayal. It is not deceit. It is indeed part and parcel of the lifestyle he and Mrs. Brown embarked upon jointly." A hush went through the crowd, but the lawyer's phrases held a deliberate force. He wasn't only defending Kody, he was attempting to redirect the narrative completely. "Was there contact with a different woman?" he went on. "Yes. But contact is not adultery. Talking is not lying. My client never followed through on these talks, never consummated another relationship, and never left his obligations to Mrs. Brown." Robyn's lawyer was out of her chair before he could even get the words out. "Objection, Your Honor," she declared tersely. "This is not a matter of religion. This is a matter of premeditated deception, of secret bank accounts, marriage contracts, and schemes hatched in the dark. My client was not consulted, was not told, and was not offered an option. That is not religious practice. That is betrayal." "Sustained," the judge ruled, shooting a warning glance at the defense. "Stay within the bounds of the evidence, counsel." The defense lawyer adjusted his tie, getting back on track. "Then let's discuss evidence," he said, striding in front of the jury box. There were messages, but none of them specifically stated Mr. Brown was divorcing his wife. None of them suggested abandonment. In fact, several of them were filled with deep love for Mrs. Brown. He wrote, and I'll quote this as well, "Robyn is and will always be my partner." A sneer escaped from Robyn's side of the room. She could not help herself. It was a scornful laugh, one that testified to wounds too deep to heal with empty words. The lawyer addressed the jury, taking the opportunity. "We've had a great deal of emotional testimony. And I don't fault Mrs. Brown. She is wounded. But emotions, however distressing, are not proof of misbehavior. What we have here is a man seeking out the tenets of his faith, and a woman misinterpreting that seeking out as betrayal. The law can't condemn a person simply because their spouse feels betrayed." The statement hung in the air like a challenge. It was a calculated gamble, one that might sway jurors who valued logic over emotion. But Robyn's attorney was ready. "Your Honor," she said, advancing with a pile of papers. "Let's see what exploring faith looks like." She presented new evidence on the screen one by one. Flight schedules to see the woman in person, outlines of a legal contract addressing Robyn as first wife, and a private email discussing a transition plans for introducing the new wife into the family. The jury gasped. Even the judge's eyebrow went up. "This is not faith," Robyn's lawyer stated. "This is planning. This is plotting. This is deception at its most calculated. My client was not privy to any of these conversations. She was not asked for permission. She was not even informed. She was erased from a future being built without her permission. Kody shifted uncomfortably, his jaw clenching. His lawyer attempted to salvage. These are exploratory papers, he offered weakly. Nothing was committed. Nothing was signed. Not yet, Robyn's lawyer retorted. Because he got caught. The courtroom erupted with murmurs again. Kody's face flushed red, the confident mask he had worn for years beginning to crack under the pressure. He looked less like a misunderstood husband, now and more like a man cornered by the consequences of his actions. The defense made one final bid to save the day. Mr. Brown has cared for his family, maintained his children and stayed true to his duties. If errors have occurred, they were done in good faith. Robyn's lawyer didn't hesitate. And yet they involved lying, concealing money and organizing a second wedding while promising my client she was his forever. If that's not malice, then I don't know what is. The judge struck his gavel. Enough. That's enough for today. But the harm was done. The defense had entered the courtroom expecting to portray Kody as a man misunderstood, a victim of cultural misunderstanding and emotional hypersensitivity. Instead, they had underscored his arrogance, his duplicity and his willingness to use anyone, even the legal system, to rationalize his treachery. As the courtroom cleared, Robyn sat for a full minute eyeing the man she used to trust. Kody looked away, his shoulders rigid, his jaw locked in place. For years he had dictated the story, twisting his behavior as virtuous, righteous, even heroic. But now, bare of alibis and shrouded in only the legalities, the reality was undeniable. And as Robyn exited through the horde of reporters, one thing was certain: the defense may have battled back, but the tide had long since turned against Kody Brown. The world and the court were beginning to peel back the veneer, and what they saw was a man who had constructed his life out of loyalty, and then violated every bit of it. The courtroom was abuzz the next morning before the gavel came down. A surprise witness had been added to Robyn's team, someone whose testimony might blow Kody's case wide open. The media flooded the courthouse steps. Cameras filled the hallways, and social media erupted with rumors. Who was it? Another woman? A financial guru? Nobody anticipated that the door would burst open and reveal Christine Brown, Kody's ex-wife and one of the most central people in his life. Gasps circulated through the courtroom as Christine confidently walked to the witness stand. She wasn't the meek girl the viewers had remembered seeing on the show. Hesitant, soft-spoken, always striving to maintain the peace. This Christine was calm, outspoken, and prepared to tell truths that had lain in wait for decades. The color drained from Kody's face as soon as he laid eyes on her. He nudged his attorney, whispering wildly, but too late. Christine was sworn in, and the truth was going to blow. Mrs. Brown, Robyn's lawyer started, her voice deferential but edged. How long were you married to the defendant? 26 years, Christine responded solidly. I was his third wife. I raised children with him, shared a life with him, believed in him, and I left when I understood that all the promises he ever made were all lies. The judge leaned back in his chair slightly, as if bracing for the oncoming storm. Can you clarify what you meant by that? The attorney probed. Christine breathed deeply. I mean that Kody Brown is not the man he appears to be. The world views a husband fighting for his family. I viewed a man crazed with power, image, and control. And one of the first things he ever said to me, way before Robyn came into the picture, was that he would never cease seeking someone new. Kody's lawyer leapt to his feet. Objection, speculation regarding the defendant's motive is irrelevant. The judge waved him off. Overruled. It relates to a pattern of conduct. Christine went on, her gaze fixed on Kody. Years prior to leaving, he said, and I quote, Robyn isn't forever. She's just the next chapter. Later on, I'll have to get someone younger, someone who's where I'm headed. I disregarded it at the time. I figured it was just empty words. But the older he became, the more fixated he was on what the world perceived of him. He began telling me that Robyn made him appear aged, that she was too emotional for what he wanted to do. The room gasped. Robyn's fists were clenched, and Kody's jaw hardened. He shook his head infinitesimally, mouthing the words, that's not true. But Christine wasn't done. I was present when he began discussing with me meeting younger ladies at church functions. I was present when he joked about getting a new favorite wife to make the others jealous. And I was present when he informed Robyn that if she could not conform to better suit his new persona, he would find someone who could. The gallery hummed with whispers. Jurors shifted uncomfortable glances. The portrait emerging was no longer that of confused husband or misunderstood religious man. It was one of manipulation and decades-long premeditated betrayal. Robyn's lawyer moved forward. Mrs. Brown, did you ever see Miss Brown make arrangements for a new marriage while he was still married to you? Christine shook her head slowly. Yes, twice. First when I was still a part of the family, and then after I left. Both times he lured in younger women in our community. He promised things, money, recognition from the show, a role in his legacy. He sought out someone to follow him blindly, someone who would make him feel powerful once more. It was never about love. It was about control. The defense lawyer sprang up once more, his voice in desperation. Objection, Your Honor, hearsay and irrelevant. Overruled, the judge replied sternly. The witness is speaking from first-hand experience. The jury will determine how much weight to give her testimony. Christine sat forward, her voice lower, but stronger. Kody always thought he could do whatever he wanted. He thought that regardless of what he did, the women in his life would remain. Because they were afraid, because they were needy, because they were invested in the fantasy he sold them. And for years we were. But Robyn's situation is not a miscommunication. It's the natural outcome of a man who has been lying, manipulating, and scheming for decades. The courtroom was silent as a tomb. Kody sat poker-faced, refusing to glance at anyone, not Robyn, not Christine, not even the judge. His skin was white, his hands clenched so tightly they turned white too. Each thing Christine said broke away the final fragments of the story his defense had worked so desperately to shore up. Robyn's lawyer presented the last question. Mrs. Brown, in your estimation, did Mr. Brown's behavior toward Robyn occur suddenly? Or was it part of a long history? Christine didn't flinch. This isn't sudden. It's who he is. Robyn isn't the first woman he's betrayed. She's just the last one left standing. And he was going to replace her, just as he was going to replace the rest of us, the moment it was convenient for his ego. A shocked gasp ran through the courtroom. The judge stared over his spectacles at Kody, his face inscrutable. Even the jury seemed shaken, taking frantic notes as Christine's testimony unpicked the defense case piece by piece. As Christine exited the stand, she stopped for a moment alongside Robyn and put a comforting hand upon her shoulder. The two women, once adversaries in a dysfunctional home, stood as one now, against the same man who had wounded them both. Kody sat frozen, his expression a maelstrom of anger, humiliation, and terror. His lawyer attempted to speak softly into his ear, but it was obvious they both recognized the harm was permanent. Christine hadn't simply testified. She had dropped a truth bomb that torched every last vestige of credibility Kody possessed. And as the trial drew to a close, one thing was clear. This trial was no longer simply a case of Robyn's betrayal. It was a matter of decades of deception, manipulation, and control. And now, with Christine's words ringing in the courtroom, the jury and the world finally saw Kody Brown for what he really is. The courtroom was subdued as usual when Robyn went back onto the stand. But this time, things were different. The tearful, shaking woman who had collapsed days before was nowhere to be found. The broken wife who had pleaded with the court to hear her grief was gone. Standing before the judge now was a woman changed, fiery, indignant, and done with being silenced. The change was so evident that even the bailiff, typically expressionless, caught a glimpse as she made her way to the witness stand. Robyn fiddled with the mic, straightened her shoulders, and glared at Kody. Her eyes no longer held fear. Only rage, the kind that simmers for years of lies, and finally boils over when there's nothing left to lose. I sat here for days, she started, her tone firm but raging, and I've heard the excuses. I've heard lawyers spin words. I've heard people try to spin Kody as some confused man of faith, but let me tell you what he actually is. A liar, a manipulator, and the man who turned my life into a circus of humiliation." The gallery gasped. Even the judge raised an eyebrow. Robyn's lawyer nodded slightly, imperceptibly telling her to go on. "When I married Kody initially," she went on, her voice growing louder, I thought all of the things he told me. I thought him, when he said I was his soulmate. I thought him, when he told me we were going to grow old together. And I had trusted him when he said that I was the one for whom he had waited his whole life. But did you know what the truth is?" She locked her eyes onto him. "I was never anything but a placeholder. A convenience, a name to use in order to appear faithful, while he schemed for something better." Kody squirmed restlessly in his chair. His lawyer leaned over and spoke something in his ear, but he did not answer. Robyn was unstoppable now, and no one could do anything to hold her back. "I defended you," she suddenly shrieked, her dignity cracking into red, volcanic anger. "I defended you when the world was calling you selfish. I stood up for you when Christine and Janelle strayed off and called you a narcissist. I stood up for you when others ridiculed us on national TV. And how do you thank me? By scheming a wedding without my knowledge. By labeling me as too emotional. By informing other women that I was no longer good enough for you." Her voice trembled with emotion, but it was not weakness. It was strength. Each sentence was a knife, cutting deeper into the picture Kody had so painstakingly attempted to maintain. "Do you know what it is like to see your husband making long-range plans that do not include you? Do you know what it is like to wake up one morning and know that while you were trying to save your marriage, he was trying to replace you?" The judge rapped his gavel softly. "Mrs. Brown, speak to the court, not to the defendant." Robyn nodded, brushing away a tear, but her eyes never wavered from Kody. "Your Honor, this is not just betrayal. This is psychological abuse. This is a man who used love as bait, who made me feel protected, only to tear the ground out from beneath me when it benefited him. He didn't just cheat on a marriage. He broke every shred of trust a human can have for another." There was a heavy silence in the room. Even the curious ones who had come out of curiosity, bloggers, reporters, fans, were now seated still, their faces visibly shaken by the nakedness of her words. The jurors were watching Robyn intensely, many of them visibly affected. Robyn rested her elbows on her knees, her voice growing cold and measured. "And the worst part," she went on, "is that I still loved him, even after all the deceptions, even after all the embarrassment. I still had hope he'd look me in the eye and say, 'I choose you,' but he never did. He just kept on choosing himself." Kody's head dangled low. For the first time since the trial started, the arrogant haughtiness was absent. There was no smile, no well-practiced attitude of masterfulness. Just a man looking at his hands, too humiliated to look the woman in whose bed he had done the damage. Robyn drew a deep breath and faced the judge. "This case is not about marriage," she told him. "It's about responsibility. Kody has hurt people and simply gotten away with it for far too long. He's done it to Christine. He's done it to Janelle. He's done it to Mary. And now he's done it to me. And he does it every time telling himself he's a victim, that he's misunderstood. He's transparent." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Robyn's lawyer put a hand on her arm, gesturing that she could leave. But Robyn was not done. She turned once more to Kody, her voice low but shaking with authority. "You might have shattered my heart," she declared, "but you will not shatter my dignity. You might have mapped a life in your absence, but I will map one without you. And I guarantee you, the world will know what you have done here. Not because you betrayed me, but because I would not let you get away with it." The courtroom exploded into a tempest of whispers, journalists running to catch every word. Even the judge hesitated before rising to adjourn, as though to give weight to Robyn's last words. Kody sat frozen, his face drained, his chest heaving in shallow gulps of air. All attempt at control he had attempted to hold onto was lost. The image of the patriarchal figure, the spiritual head, the husband who professed to love equally, was destroyed irretrievably. And worse even than the jury's verdict, or the media's verdict, was the fact that Robyn, the very person he believed would never desert him, had become his strongest opponent. As she left the stand, Robyn didn't glance back. She didn't have to. The authority she had previously accorded to Kody with her silence was now exclusively hers again. And the man who believed he could take her place had just seen his kingdom start to topple under the rubble of her honesty. The gavel came down. Session 5 was adjourned. But the war for justice was far from over. The woman Kody had once underestimated had become the weapon that could potentially finally topple him. And for the first time in his life, he was actually scared. The courtroom was heavier that morning, as if the air was itself bearing down on the debris of all that had been spoken. The media had demonized him. His former wives had testified against him. Robyn's wrath had burned through what little sympathy the public still had. And now, with no one else left to call, Kody Brown himself was summoned to testify. Gone was the arrogant smugness he had paraded on television. Gone was the man who swaggered through gatherings of his families, sure of his power. The Kody approaching the witness stand today was a shadow of that man. Slumping shoulders, shaking hands, eyes etched from nights without sleep. His reputation was hemorrhaging before the world, and this testimony was his last hope to stem the damage. Mr. Brown, Robyn's lawyer started off, her voice firm and uncompromising. Do you realize that you are under oath? Yes, he spoke softly, his voice hardly above a whisper. Do you realize that perjury, lying under oath, is illegal? Yes, good, she said, walking slowly in front of the jury. Then let's begin with something elementary. Did you or did you not intend to introduce another woman into your marriage behind Robyn's back? Kody swallowed. I thought about it, he said. I thought about it. Yes, the gallery burst into gasps. Robyn looked at him, blank, but her hands were shaking in her lap. The judge rapped his gavel for order. Why? The attorney asked. Why would you do this to the woman who stood up for you when no one else would? Kody hesitated, his voice trembling as he spoke. Because I was lonely. Because things weren't the same anymore. The family fell apart. The kids stopped talking to me. The cameras stopped calling. And Robyn, she changed. She wasn't the same woman I married. She became distant, angry. I felt unloved. Robyn's lawyer's face grew stern. So your solution was to find someone younger? I didn't mean it like that. Kody stammered. I wanted to be important again. I wanted someone who looked at me like she used to. A mirthless laugh came from Robyn's side of the courtroom. The judge looked at her furiously. But she did not apologize. She did not need to. The whole courtroom knew that laugh. The sound of a woman listening to the pitiful excuses of a man who had shattered her. The lawyer moved closer. Mr. Brown, is it true that you deposited funds into another account in preparation for a new life? Kody paused. It wasn't like that, yes or no? Yes, isn't it true that you sat down with another woman in private and negotiated marriage terms? No, those were hypothetical discussions. Yes or no? Yes, isn't it true you called your wife too emotional and expressed that you needed someone more obedient? I never meant yes or no. Yes, each yes was a knife, cutting deeper into whatever was left of Kody's defense. The jurors' faces were hard now, no longer inquiring, no longer sympathetic. They were observing a man disintegrating under the weight of his own hubris. Robyn's lawyer ceased her pacing and turned again to face the stand. Mr. Brown, she began slowly. Slowly, do you understand what this is? This isn't loneliness. This isn't confusion. This is premeditated betrayal. You plotted a life without your wife while she was still sleeping beside you. You constructed a future in which she didn't exist, and you thought you could walk away without facing any consequences. Kody's calm cracked. I never wanted to hurt her, he bellowed suddenly, his voice cracking. I just wanted to feel like I counted again. I gave everything to this family. I worked myself into the ground trying to keep it all together while everybody abandoned me. Christine abandoned me. Janelle abandoned me. Mary abandoned me. And I thought that if I went and started all over again I could get it all right. I didn't destroy anything on purpose. The courtroom was hushed, but not compassionate. His words weren't regret, they were excuses. And they left one thing painfully obvious. Kody still hadn't realized the intensity of the hurt he had inflicted. Robyn's lawyer stepped a step nearer, speaking in a softer voice. You repeat that you needed to feel important. Did you ever consider feeling important to her though? Did you ever consider the lady who stood up for you when nobody else would? Who remained when everybody else departed? Did you ever consider how she felt before you began mapping out your next journey? Kody's lips quivered. No, he breathed. I suppose I didn't. And that, she said, icily is the issue. The silence that followed was oppressive. Even Kody's lawyer seemed to realize there was no saving this. Every shred of evidence, every confession, every sobbing testimony had brought it to this point. The man at the center, at last stripped of alibis. Mr. Brown, the judge interrupted, his tone firm and deliberative. What you've outlined here is not a miscommunication. It's betrayal. Violent, intentional betrayal. And while this court will have the final say as to the law, I trust you see that the emotional ones, those you manufactured entirely yourself. Kody said nothing. His eyes were watery, unfocused. He glanced about the courtroom, at the jurors who no longer perceived him as a victim, at the reporters who would rip his name apart, and lastly at Robyn, who looked at him with a combination of repulsion and tragic finality. For the first time, he appeared like a man who really knew that he had lost. As he left the stand, he locked eyes with Robyn for a split second, one fleeting moment. She didn't glance away, but there was nothing remaining in her eyes. No forgiveness, no love, no hint of the woman who had thought him her forever. Kody Brown returned to his seat a defeated man. He had risked everything. His marriage, his reputation, his legacy on the idea of a new beginning. And now, standing amidst the ruins of his decisions, he was starting to understand the reality. He hadn't lost Robyn. He had lost himself. And the worst part, the judgment hadn't even been passed yet. When Kody Brown was summoned back to the witness stand, the courtroom was a pressure cooker ready to erupt. Weeks of witness testimony had ruined his public image. Christine's testimony had exposed decades of manipulation. Robyn's anger had made the country turn against him. And now the fellow who had once swaggered through life in arrogant self-assurance, shuffled towards the witness stand like a broken man confronting his own judgment. For years Kody had been untouched. Cameras trailed behind him wherever he went. Men and women worshipped him or loathed him, but never dismissed him. Now the very same public, who in the past had watched to see his polygamous kingdom fall apart, were watching for another reason, to see a man who had so betrayed what he said he believed fall. He rested his hand on the Bible, took the oath, and sat down. His shoulders were slumped, his voice was low, and the flame that had burned in his eyes was now just a smoldering ember. The courtroom remained still and quiet. Mr. Brown, Robyn's lawyer started, her voice as hard as steel. You have heard from 3 of your previous wives. You have heard testimony regarding secret accounts, planning for marriage, and discreet discussion for replacing your wife. Do you refute any of it? Kody nervously licked his lips. I don't deny that I made mistakes. Mistakes? She repeated, her body angling forward. You didn't forget to remove the garbage. You mapped out a life without your wife and slept in the same bed with her. You lied directly to her face when you deposited money into secret accounts. You told other women she was too emotional and no longer who you desired. That's not a mistake, Mr. Brown. That's betrayal. He winced as though he had been hit. I didn't mean to deceive her, he whispered. I felt as though everything was coming apart. The family, the show, my relationships with my children. Robyn was constantly angry. Remote, I felt isolated in my own house. And in place of repairing your marriage, the lawyer hammered, you substituted it. Kody's voice broke. I thought that new relationship would restore hope to me. I thought it would make me feel alive. I didn't want to hurt Robyn. I was trying to repair my life. There is a raw, bitter laugh that escapes Robyn from across the room. A hollow, disbelieving sound that cuts into the silence. She shakes her head slowly, her eyes watery but icy. You were trying to repair your life by destroying mine, she mutters under her breath. The lawyer jumped on it. Mr. Brown, is it correct that you informed one of these women you told that Robyn served her purpose, and you were ready for someone new? Kody's jaw dropped, but nothing emerged. He glanced at his lawyer, who shook his head and indicated he should respond. Yes, he whispered. And is it also true that you informed Robyn, the woman who stood up for you against the world, that she was lucky you hung around as long as you did? The color had left his face. I may have uttered a few words to that effect, he muttered. The courtroom dissolved into soft whispers. Even the judge's face grew stern. Mr. Brown, he spoke sharply, I strongly recommend you answer these questions in a truthful and straightforward manner. Yes, Kody replied at last, his voice cracking. I said that. For the first time in his life, the man who had always spoken last now appeared helpless, a captive of his own pride. His alibis were flimsy at best, and he knew it, but as the lawyer continued to question him, something inside Kody snapped. You don't understand, he bellowed out, his words ringing through the courtroom. I constructed this family from scratch. I bore the burden of 4 marriages, 18 children, a television show, a public life, and nobody cared when I was suffering. They all abandoned me. Christine, Janelle, Mary, they all walked out and blamed me for everything. And when Robyn began to pull away as well, I thought maybe if I found someone else, I could begin again. I could feel like a man again. The tantrum shocked the room. For an instant, silence. Then Robyn's lawyer moved in, her tone frigid and measured. And did you ever stop to consider? She asked. The woman who was hurting, the one who stood with you when the rest of them turned away, the one who believed every word you ever said. Did you ever once consider how she felt? Kody's face contorted. He looked down at his hands, shaking, his voice barely above a whisper. No, he said. I didn't. And that, said the lawyer softly, is the tragedy of the whole tale. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Even the jurors looked shaken. What they saw wasn't just a man who betrayed his wife. They saw a man who had betrayed himself. Kody's empire wasn't destroyed by Christine leaving, or Janelle's independence, or Mary's distance. It was destroyed by his own ego, his own inability to value the people who loved him until they were gone. The judge drew forward, his own voice firm but stern. Mr. Brown, the facts and your own words present an unmistakable picture. This isn't a case of mistaken identity. This is calculated, intentional action. Action that had tremendous emotional damage. Though the legal repercussions await determination, you need to grasp the gravity of what you have accomplished. Kody said nothing. He couldn't. His throat constricted. His chest weighed down. Descending from the stand, he caught a fleeting glance at Robyn. She did not glance his way. Her eyes were fixed, impassive, straight ahead, as though she had already mourned something's passing years before the trial started. He went back to his seat, his thoughts a whirlwind of remorse and fear. All he had created was slipping away from him. His marriage, his family, his name. And for the first time ever, he knew something that frightened him more than losing the trial. He had nothing left to control. And as the judge requested a recess, one fact rang louder than the gavel. Kody Brown had attempted to be the man in charge for years, and now he was merely a man pleading for mercy. The last day of trial broke under a heavy gray sky, as if even the weather comprehended the gravity of what was to come. Crowds of people congregated outside the courthouse before dawn, reporters pushed to the front, and Sister Wives fans weathered the rain overnight just to catch a glimpse of the man who once proclaimed himself to be a loving father and husband. Today, however, Kody Brown was not walking onto a television studio or a fan convention. He was walking into judgment. Within the courtroom was a whirl of subdued, nervous tension. Robyn sat at the plaintiff's table, fingers clenched tightly in her lap, her face serene but expressionless. She had wept all the tears possible during this trial. Now there was nothing left to do but be strong. This was no longer about revenge. It was about closure, about regaining the dignity Kody had sought to take from her. Kody appeared a moment later, his body slumped, his face empty, his swagger was gone, replaced by the edgy, nearly broken gait of a man who recognized that his destiny was no longer his own to decide. He caught Robyn's eye for a moment, a glimpse of the man who had loved her once striving to emerge. But she did not meet his eye. That book was closed. All rise, cried the bailiff, and in walked the judge, seating himself with grave dignity. The room was plunged into utter silence. Even the reporters lowered their pens as the jury entered, their expressions grim and stern. Has the jury arrived at a verdict? Asked the judge. The foreperson, a tired-eyed middle-aged woman, rose. We have, Your Honor, She gripped a folded paper in shaking hands. A piece of paper that would determine the future of Kody. The judge nodded. Please read the verdict. The room as a whole gasped. In the case of Robyn Brown versus Kody Brown, the four-person began to read. We, the jury, find the defendant responsible for emotional fraud, marital deception, and breach of fiduciary duty within marriage. A gasp of shock rippled through the courtroom. Robyn slowly breathed out, her eyes shut, one tear rolling down her cheek, this time not from hurt but from relief. Kody's face paled, his jaw hanging open, as though the words themselves had physically knocked him back. The four-person added, we also give the plaintiff sole control over all jointly owned properties and financial holdings and award full ownership of any future royalties on media appearances or publications carrying the Brown family name. The gallery broke into whispers. This wasn't a legal defeat. It was a complete breakdown. The empire Kody had constructed, the dominance he had held onto for decades, was being taken from him bit by bit. The judge brought his gavel up to restore order. Mr. Brown, he said, his voice stern but moderate. This court has seen overwhelming evidence of intentional deception, emotional manipulation, and financial fraud. Marriage is not a business contract. It is not a means of control, and it is not a game to be played with another human being's dignity. You did more than break your vows. You turned them into weapons. Kody swallowed hard, his hands shaking in his lap. Your Honor, please, he whispered, his voice breaking. I never intended any of this to happen. I thought I was doing what was best for me. Whatever was best for you, the judge said sternly, happened at the cost of everyone else. And now, you'll have to pay the price for those decisions. He paused and went on. In addition, this court directs the defendant to pay monetary restitution to the plaintiff for emotional damages and therapy expenses paid as a direct consequence of his behavior. Failure to do so will lead to additional legal action. Kody slumped in his chair, defeated. For years he had played life his way, warping relationships, spinning stories, dictating outcomes. But now, there was no script to rewrite, no spin to salvage him. This was real life, and it was relentless. Robyn rose slowly, addressing the judge. Thank you, Your Honor, she replied quietly. It's not about money, it's about responsibility. It's about proving to him, and to the world, that women are not things that are disposable. We are not chapters that you get to close when you're tired. We are not placeholders in another person's book. The judge inclined respectfully. Mrs. Brown, this court applauds your bravery. Kody lifted his head, his eyes red and hollow, and spoke one last time. Robyn, he whispered across the courtroom. I'm sorry. For a brief moment, their eyes met, not as husband and wife, not as lovers, but as strangers bound by a past that could never be undone. Robyn gave a small nod, not of forgiveness, but of finality. It was over. As the judge banged the gavel to close the session, the courtroom erupted into chaos. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but Robyn didn't hear any of it. She walked out with her head held high, the weight of years of betrayal finally lifted from her shoulders. Kody sat, blankly staring at the table before him. All that he had previously cherished, power, image, control, was lost. The wives who had orbited around him previously had established new lives. The children who had idolized him had withdrawn, and the woman who had stayed with him the longest had just left his life forever. The ruling wasn't a legal verdict alone. It was a declaration. It was the last page in a book Kody never thought would end this way. And as the court cleared, one thing was glaringly apparent. The man who once felt he could replace anyone had himself become the man who could no longer be replaced. Justice had been served for Robyn. Judgment Day had arrived for Kody, and for the world that was watching, it was an education done in real time. A warning that betrayal, however deeply buried, always resurfaces in the light. The courtroom might have cleared out, but the reverberations of that last gavel still echoed loudly in Kody Brown's life. Outside the courthouse, the air was heavy with flashing cameras, yelled questions, and the din of a media maelstrom that had no end in sight. But for Robyn, pushing through those courthouse doors was something different, an escape from the prison she'd been living in for so long. For the first time in years, she wasn't defined by Kody's decisions. She wasn't the subservient wife quietly standing in his shadow. She was liberated. Reporters mobbed her the moment she stepped out of the steps. Robyn, how do you feel about the verdict? Do you forgive Kody? What's next for you? She hesitated for a moment, looking up from beneath a sheaf of microphones and blinding flashlights. There was no fury in her eyes. Only ranked. Not my win alone, she declared, her voice firm and tranquil. For every woman ever made small, for every wife ever told she would be replaced. Today, I showed them we are not discardable, we are not fragile, and we are never too shattered to get up. The audience clapped wildly, and in minutes her statements were plastered across front pages, posted on social media, and mentioned on morning television. Robyn Brown stands tall. Betrayed wife aims justice. Sister wives no more. Robyn takes back her life. For years, Robyn's name had been synonymous with Kody's. She was his favorite, his last wife, the one who stayed. But now the world was discovering her name without his attached. And for Robyn, that was the best revenge of all. Within the courthouse, Kody stayed behind in the dwindling courtroom long after the rest had departed. His lawyer had left. The jury had left. The journalists had left to pursue Robyn. And there he sat, gazing blankly at the wooden table in front of him. The former patriarch of a large plural family was now simply a man by himself, not seated around wives, not trailed by cameras, not loved or hated, just alone. He considered the decisions that led him to where he is today. The lies, the deception, the arrogance that made him believe he could not be touched. He had created an empire of loyalty and trust, then reduced it to ashes for chasing youth and approval, and all he was left with in the end was regret. One picture on his phone stopped him in his tracks, one from so many years before. He, Robyn, Christine, Janelle and Mary, were all lined up, their faces smiling for the cameras in the midst of Sister Wives' popularity. He recalled how good he used to feel, how much he was in control. But now, all he could see was a man who had no idea he was about to lose everything. Outside, Robyn got into a waiting car. As it pulled away from the courthouse, she gazed out the window, the city skyline glinting against the glass. There was sorrow indeed, a profound pain for the love she'd imagined she'd found, and the future she'd envisioned, but also peace. For years, she had been stuck in a pattern of disappointment, tiptoeing around, hanging on to the hope that things would finally change. Now she didn't have to hope. She was free at last to start over, on her own terms. In the days and weeks ahead, the verdict made headlines. Talk shows analyzed every aspect of the trial. Documentaries were in development. Interviews were solicited. And as Kody stayed quiet, stepping out of the limelight, Robyn found a new role for herself, as an advocate for women who had been betrayed and manipulated. She spoke publicly at women's conferences, made national TV appearances, and even started working on a memoir. Her tale, once one of heartbreak, was now a testament to her strength. Meanwhile, Kody's world was disintegrating. Money losses piled up. Public sentiment was poisonous. Ex-fans inundated social media with hate speech. Even his kids, most of whom had disowned him years ago, publicly addressed the harm his behavior had done. The man who had assumed he was a leader couldn't even get his own life in order. But maybe the most vicious cut of all came silently. One of the tabloids released a photo of the woman Kody had initially intended to introduce into his life, the younger woman who he thought would save him from his woe. She was seen hand in hand with another, smiling, blissful, and very much not interested in the man who had risked losing everything for her. The new story that he'd been pursuing had reached its end before it had even started. Months later, Robyn made another visit to the courthouse, not for a second trial, but to sign on the dotted line that officially ended her marriage to Kody Brown. She stood upright and calm, pen clutched in her hand, and as she signed her signature, she felt the final burden of their past finally remove itself from her shoulders. It was finished. Entirely at last, irretrievably finished. And as she stepped out into the bright sun of the afternoon, she smiled. Not because she had won, but because she had lived. And living, she knew, was the ultimate triumph. For Kody, the aftermath was a mirror he could not shake. It showed him every lie, every betrayal, every bridge burned. The man who had envisioned himself as the master builder of his family's future was now nothing more than a cautionary tale, a warning about the price of selfishness and the cost of betrayal. For Robyn, the start of something new. No longer a figure in Kody's narrative, she was penning her own, one that found strength in heartache, freedom in suffering, and self-worth, not based on someone else's approval. And for the millions who had followed their drama, it was a reminder that even the most abiding betrayals cannot break a woman who chooses to stop being broken. The court fight was done, but the true story, Robyn's story, was only just starting. And as the headlines diminished and the cameras departed, one thing was crystal clear. Kody Brown spent his lifetime attempting to be the man that every woman required. But in the end, all he ended up teaching them was how much stronger they could be without him.